Q&A feature to post your questions. This session qualifies for 1.5 CEUs. Upon entering the Zoom session, you were asked to enter your name. This will allow us to track your participation. We will submit to FCSI to ensure that you receive your CEUs. We'll give everyone a few minutes to make sure your name is entered correctly before we capture attendance. So with that out of the way, a quick introduction of myself for those who don't know me or were not in attendance yesterday. I'm Tim McDougall, FCSI Pacific Northwest Chapter Leader, Project Manager and BIM Coordinator for Clevenger Associates. I've been with Clevenger for 7 years now. Before that, I was on the architecture side for 10 years with a dream of becoming an architect. That didn't really pan out, but I couldn't be more happy with where I am right now. I'm an amateur home chef, a former local musician who plays bass guitar. I race stock cars on the weekends, and I love riding the Harleys with my wife. 2020 has been filled with surprises and continues to throw curveballs at the food service industry and its channels. I'm joined today by PRNW Principal Jeff Cunningham and PRNW Principal Greg Stouffer. Jeff has been involved in the food service industry for 26 years, starting as a dealer and now manufacturer's rep. He's proud to carry on the family business. Greg has been in the industry for 32 years, all of which has been with PRNW. I'm also joined by Kirk Goss, VP of Consultant Relations with Wellbuilt. Kirk has been in the industry for 28 years, 14 of that with Wellbuilt. And of course, myself, Tim McDougall with Clevenger Associates. So yesterday, we talked about how everyone has had to adapt to the events of 2020. Today, I thought we'd talk about the forecast for 2021 and kind of see what's coming. And I thought this time I'd go ahead and kick it off, and then you guys can respond to that. So first thing I want to say is, just let's state a disclaimer that this is 100% my opinion and does not reflect the opinions of or position of Clevenger Associates, okay? So keep that in mind. I tend to be a glasses half full kind of guy. I always lean towards the optimistic, sometimes to a fault. On the design side of things, I'm seeing that this past year has sort of hit the fast forward button on a lot of things, if you will. It's clear that any restaurant that was already set up in even the smallest manner to properly handle off-premise dining has absolutely crushed it, without a doubt. Other establishments have had to really jump in the off-premise dining world head first. There's no shallow end here. You just have to go for it off the high dive, right? We were already seeing trends in places putting in second make lines dedicated to off-premise orders. Some places do it well, some maybe not so much. But this thing has really hit fast forward on all of that. And as designers, I think we're going to see a lot more push to make sure we're factoring that into our designs in the beginning. Are we designing proper space for dedicated off-premise make lines? Did we even think about dedicated off-premise make lines? And if our clients didn't think about it, did we think about it for them? Because that's what they pay us to do, right? I think you're going to see the average restaurant footprint shrink. The days of the 100 and 150 seat establishments, I think, are gone. I predict you're going to see a move to smaller spaces, 25, 40 seats, hyper-focused menus, small joints, because overhead for things like square footage are just too much to carry right now. And I know a lot of those places are out there right now, but I think it's going to become more prevalent and more normal. The other thing I expect to see more of is ghost kitchens. We talked a little bit about this yesterday in our final session. I think this will start to be a much more common term. I think we'll see a lot more of these large management companies like Darden, RBI, and Yum start to push out ghost kitchens where your Uber Eats and DoorDash will go through the ghost kitchen instead of the actual brick and mortar. This will let them consolidate any off-premise orders for all of their brands into a single location and then be delivered from there. For us designers, that's a good thing because somebody's got to design those ghost kitchens, right? So to recap from my point of view, my forecast for 2021 is a bigger focus on off-premise dining during the design phase, much smaller establishments with hyper-focused, hyper-local menus, and ghost kitchens becoming a lot more common. Jeff, I'd like to hear from you next.
Thanks, Tim. Actually, Greg is going to take this one. He's going to go first, and I'll follow up with him.
Well, you know, I did it a little different type of perspective. I was reading a report the other day in the Washington Restaurant Association article about, they're saying about 35% of the hospitality businesses in the state of Washington will be closed permanently, which is kind of upsetting. And after listening into the chapter meeting yesterday afternoon with all you guys, the consultants, it sounds like there's not a lot of things coming down the pipeline. And in the typical consultant world, things are usually a year out for a consultant. So, obviously when we're not out there bidding these jobs that are coming through, we're not going to be seeing anything for a year or so. And a lot of the consultant jobs are the bigger jobs that are out there. The day-to-day small replacement business will probably be non-existent or very slim just because of all the closures of all the restaurants and possibly the flooding of the market of used equipment. I think with the vaccines nearing their final approvals and assuming that we can get the distribution out there, I think the first half of next year is going to be really, really tough for a lot of people, a lot of rep firms as well. And I'm optimistic that the second half of the year we'll start to see an uptick in some volume and some more opportunities. So that's about what I have.
Yeah, and I agree. I think at the end of the day, people need to eat, right? So it's just going to be a different way that we go about it. Like Tim, you mentioned ghost kitchens, and I think that's going to be a big thing. I think concepts are going to change. At the end of the day, I mean, people do need to eat. There's a lot of us. Our company, I think, is in a unique position because we're heavy equipment, mostly orientated. So we haven't seen the impact, I think, of a lot of the tabletop guys see. So we're very fortunate there. So I just think we need to communicate with our channel partners and consultants and manufacturers and make sure we're doing R&D in the right places to build the right equipment that people need to see and just adapt. We need to keep adapting. I mean, we need to see the trends and we need to be on it and we need to be proactive and keep grinding.
Yeah, that's good insight, guys. I appreciate it. So Kirk, after hearing your reps talk there, what do you got to add?
Well, I think everybody's got, the right paintbrush and they're painting on the right canvas. It is an accurate read as to what's going on in the industry. We heard also yesterday, Robin run through the forecasts and how it's an unprecedented dip in overall sales as an industry. But with that said, like you, Tim, almost to a fault, I'm a glass half full kind of guy as well. I said it yesterday. I think there's pent up demand. I agree with Jeff and company that, we are inherently, I don't want to say lazy as a society. We all want to go out to eat. We all love those experiences and we want that back. I mean, I haven't talked to a single individual that's happy with the way things are today. So with that said, it's not just only the distribution and of the vaccine and the comfort factor. And I do agree that it's going to be, the whole first half of next year, very soft as that works its way across the United States in distribution. But it's also the awakening up of day parts, right? So we've also become, we're working within our offices. I think the most impacted day part has been breakfast across our industry. And so, the going back to work, going back to the inner cities, the driving, the commutes, those consumer engagement opportunities have to come back if we're going to realize our peak of what we experienced in 2019. So, I'm waiting on a couple of things, right? Will businesses come back and say, guys, working from home has been great, but we need you in the office 3 days a week. That's going to drive the breakfast day part and we'll see a healthy return there. So that's a mix of things, but I do agree the first half of next year is going to be a continuing challenge.
That's an interesting insight. It's interesting that you mentioned breaking it down into day parts. That's pretty hyper-focused. So
yeah.
All right. I appreciate all of our panel's input. It's always great hearing you guys' perspective. And I'm looking forward to hearing from our guest speakers today and seeing what they are forecasting for 2021. I also want to take a quick minute to thank all of our sponsors for this event: PRNW, Wellbuilt, Jackson Warewashing Systems, Caddy, and Samick. Our next guest, Robin Ashton, is going to paint a picture for us on the state of the industry according to the data. As most of you know, Robin has been covering the industry for almost 43 years. He ran FENS and founded FER, and since 2018 has published the Ashton Report and produces his annual ENS market forecast. Robin is the fun with numbers guy and will be continuing to build upon his session yesterday. Let's kick it over to Robin in Chicago.
Mute. Can you guys hear me now?
Sure can.
Good, good. Okay. Let's see if we can get the screen up. Aha. We have done it. Okay. Same slide deck as yesterday. We'll focus on a few different things. I figure, Tim, do we have any idea how many of these people are the same people as yesterday?
I don't, but you do have a pretty good audience.
All right. Well, we'll assume that at least half of you saw what I did yesterday. So I figured what I do today, and it's partially why I did this slide deck the way I did with 72 slides, is we'll focus a little more on segment differences. Kirk mentioned the change in day parts and how those have been affected, with breakfast being affected the most. Tim, Kirk cares about that because you tend to sell a lot more fast ovens into breakfast situations, since time is of the essence, and those products lend themselves to that. Just look at Starbucks. But there has been a great deal, as all of you are aware of difference between the 24 segments that make up food service, how they've been affected by the pandemic. So we'll look more closely at Technomic's forecasts for the various segments, and we'll also look more closely at what John Muldowney and I forecast as the differences between the various product categories. When we do our forecasts, we use NAFM size and shape numbers, and so we're forecasting 9 separate product categories, super product categories, and of course they've been affected in different ways as well. So if you look at those forecasts, and you also look at the MOSI barometer and some of the differences between the product segments there, you'll get a better sense of some of this detail. I want to say that listening to Tim and Jeff and Greg, and then Kirk, I agree with everything they say. I think we're going to see a lot more ghost kitchens, which I just call commissaries, because that's all they are. They're just a small version of a commissary.
No, there's
no different than what school systems are doing, except they're not using 50-gallon growing kettles. He mentioned that a number of people have gone to separate makeup lines. Chipotle was one of the first to do that. And so they moved all of their digital online ordering, phone call ordering, that sort of thing to that makeup line. And it's had a dramatic impact on their volumes. You are going to see a lot more of that. And I mean, when you look at product categories, we're talking about full batteries. We're talking about fast ovens. We're talking about makeup prep tables. I'll tell a little story from my forecast. We had an operator panel that had my friend Rob Foraker, who's now in charge of facilities and equipment at Sonic and Arby's. And for those of you who may not know, Sonic's running volumes that are as much as 40% more than they were doing from the same units last year. And they've run into a major problem with simply having enough on-site storage because those central buildings are quite small. But if you look at a Sonic and you look at all the new prototype designs that all the big QSRs have been introducing, everybody from McDonald's and Burger King to Chipotle and a bunch more, they tend to look like a Sonic with a smaller central kitchen and storage area, very small on-premise dining, if any, sometimes just a walk-up counter, and multiple drive-throughs, some of them dedicated totally to digital ordering. And you know, all the architecture and store development guys at all the big QSRs jumped into that almost the second the pandemic started, because they could see that that's the way the world was going. And you know, we all know that it's full service restaurants that have been affected the most. So I just wanted to let everybody know that what the earlier panel said, I almost completely agree with, including Tim's point and I believe Jeff's point that I tend to see the world as a glass half full rather than a glass half empty. Though as I go through this, you may wonder why I say that. All right, let's look at a couple of things here first, and just let's all keep in mind, you know, we've all talked about by mid-year, we can probably get most of those who want to be vaccinated in the U.S. The problem is there was a in the New York Times this morning, David Leonhardt, who writes the morning e-newsletter, The Morning, had a really cogent point of view for the vaccines and what's going on in the U.S. right now. He uses the metaphor of a forest fire and a fire hose. So the new vaccines that are coming, the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna are mRNA messenger vaccines, are remarkably 95% effective. But at the current rate of infection in the U.S., we're running more than 200,000 cases a day. A bunch of epidemiologists and health authorities, including the lady who's been nominated to run the CDC from Mass General up in Boston, wrote an article this week that says even if we could roll out the vaccine at the rate that it's projected to roll out right now, because the forest fire with 200,000 cases a day is raging, it'd take at least 6 months for us even to get it somewhat suppressed. And during that period, 160,000 more people could die. So when we all say that the next 6 months is going to be really tough, no matter what happens, you know, I would take that as close to gospel as anything. And, you know, as you can see from the New York Times COVID map, which I pulled on Sunday, I think, you know, this pandemic is nationwide. So, you know, it ebbs, it flows. We suppress it, we get frisky. We're seeing surges, as everybody predicted, from Thanksgiving. We're going to see more surges from Christmas and New Year's. And I was talking to my brother this morning. He runs an elementary school in Mesa, Arizona, and they are doing something. They have 2 more weeks of school. They're in a hybrid situation with some remote and some in person on a school by school basis. And his school's only had one case all fall. But what they're going to do is have everybody remote when they come back from Christmas for 2 weeks, just to see how it plays out, because they figure that people are going to, the kids are going to get sick. And then they'll have a sense of by school basis what's happening going forward. So that's, remember that affects food service too. School food service is highly affected by all this. So the pandemic is still the market, and will affect this market for years to come, really. But the next 6 months are going to be really tough. All right, let's just look at a few economic things that we focused yesterday on jobs. Let's just look at some of the macro numbers here, which are just kind of a snapshot on what's going on. We had an overall economy that was slowing in 2019 anyway, and then of course we have this pandemic mess, which has really flipped things on a quarter by quarter basis, and you can see that more in the disposable personal income chart here. Okay, so things are kind of bumping along at about 2%. These are real numbers now. These are deflated numbers. This is disposable personal income. And, it actually was a little better in the first quarter. And then you see this huge surge in disposable income in the second quarter. And what that was the CARES Act, the pandemic relief. We had 21 million people out of work suddenly, just in the blink of an eye. And they passed the CARES Act back in March, and it put a lot of money into the economy, and you can see that with that huge spike in the second quarter. Now, the $600 a month extra unemployment ran out at the end of July, and the third quarter includes June, July, and August, and so you can see the fall. And as you can see, it's forecast. This is a blue chip forecast now. It's forecast to be negative really through the first half of next year. Okay. Now you look at DPI, and then you look at consumer spending, personal consumption expenditures, as they call it, and you can see that it just moves one quarter on. So a lot of people, the savings rate in the second quarter went from about 6% to 25%. People were locked down for 2 months. They couldn't spend any money, including on food service. And certainly that, flowed out to a lack of buying food service equipment and supplies, especially tabletop, as we discussed yesterday. And then things open up in the third quarter, and they bounce back dramatically. Now, you can see that even though disposable income is actually negative through the first quarter next year, consumer spending pretty much hangs in at the same level. And 4% real growth for consumer spending is actually quite strong. So people are spending money. Not everybody, because there's still 10 or 11 million people unemployed. And there is no, pandemic relief right now. We're hoping for something this month, though I'm not holding my breath. But, things actually slow down as you go out through the end of 2021. So this is, food service sales spending is included in these PCE numbers, which is why I throw that. But as I said yesterday, the thing we really look at when we look at the big five things that drive food service sales on the macro level, and those are disposable personal income, consumer spending, jobs, and employment trends, and that's the key one. And then the other two are consumer confidence and gasoline prices. We still have more than 10 million people unemployed. This is through November, 9.8, I guess. Okay, so there's a lot of disparity in this economy between those of us who are working in our homes on Zoom right now and those who would normally be servers at the Ram Brewery in Tacoma. And those are good friends of mine, as are Bar Green Ellingson, who's been their dealer for a long time. So there is Big Red Ale. My son was serving in a fairly upscale casual dining place here 2 miles from my house in Evanston, and he's now been laid off for the second time. He's been out of work for another month. So still a lot of people unemployed, a lot of people in essential working situations, driving for Amazon or doing retail or being a nurse's aide in a nursing home that are very much at risk. From a state level, as we talked about yesterday, we've seen a lot of states, a lot of big states, New York, California, most of the upper Midwest that have lost more than 20% of their food service jobs. Most of the Pacific Northwest, 10 to 20. Okay. And so it's affected a lot of people in our industry, and I know we're all aware of that. Okay, let's skip through that. Oh, this is a chart I didn't really show yesterday. This was a Federal Reserve, I believe, of Atlanta study on the effects of the lockdowns in March and April by sector. And if you take that kind of teal blue line, that is leisure and entertainment. And then food and drink is the kind of brownish line. And as you can see, if you take those two segments and transportation and beauty and personal care, those were the sectors that were affected the most. And of course, what they are is sectors where there's interpersonal interaction. Those are the sectors that were affected most by the lockdowns. And of course, that includes food service, hotels, restaurants and airports, all that sort of thing. Confidence has actually fallen recently as the pandemic has surged. Just so everybody's aware, wholesale food prices have been ticking up. That's an impact on operator margins. Gasoline prices are historically low, and they're expected to tick up a bit next year simply as the economy recovers. All right, let's look again just at the history, and this is Technomic, Real and Nominal total industry food service sales. This includes all the non-commercial segments and supermarkets and everything else, as well as restaurants and bars. And until the Great Recession, the market, in the last 30 years has never really gone negative. That all changed in the Great Recession. That doesn't mean that food service equipment and supplies didn't go negative. And in fact, since I've been hanging around, I became editor of FES in 1982, and I was at R&I for 4 years before that. The E&S market went, in historical terms, went negative by about 25% in the interest rate recessions of 80 to 82. And the reason for that is vastly more of the market was tied to new construction. Probably more than 50% at that, 60% at that time. Now it's only about 25%. So replacement flattens out the market. The market was probably off 10 to 12% in 90 and 91 recession. It was actually ticked down negatively during the savings and loan crisis in 87 a bit. And then there was actually a recession going on, and the food service equipment market was negative in 2000 before we had September 11th in 2001. And then we came out of that in 03. and then everything crashed in '08 and recovered again in 2011. That's on the equipment and supply side. As we mentioned, things are even worse in Canada. So just so everybody's aware of that. And we talked yesterday about coronavirus concern and restaurant avoidance, which are important aspects of what's going on in this market right now. All right, let's talk a little bit about unit closures. I can't remember who mentioned it, Greg or Jeff. I believe that you know, the Washington Restaurant Association is talking about maybe 35% of their members or the restaurants in that area going out. That number sounds dramatically high to me. One of the things that we've seen, and I'm actually writing about it this week in the newsletter, is restaurant closures haven't been quite as dire as we had feared. Technomic forecast back in August that we would lose about 113,000 restaurants out of a base of 765,000, 766,000. But right now, CHD says only about 50,000 have gone out. And that's about 8% of the market, as opposed to the 20 or 30 we were worried about. Now, we've got 6 tough months coming, so it's really hard to know if that will accelerate. Greg or Jeff mentioned that there's a danger that could throw a lot of used equipment on the market, but as I discussed yesterday, some of the big dealers who are selling imported equipment, both heavy cooking and refrigeration from China. I mean, I mentioned Vesta and you know, Clark and Trimark and Pride selling that sort of thing. SIFA does too. We've got Acosta in this market selling a Chinese company selling a lot of refrigeration. Acosta is rumored to be $150 million in the U.S. with about 100,000 of that refrigeration. So there's a lot of very inexpensive new equipment in the market that may suppress that used equipment flood. We'll just have to see how it plays out. All right, I wanted to, as I said, spend more time. Most of the research services look at about the same thing this year, which is a market off somewhere between 25 and 30%. Okay. But as we said, this is very much based on what segment of the market that you're in. So I wanted to spend some time looking at the Technomic forecast. This is based on their nominal sales forecasts for the various key segments of the market. And as we discussed yesterday, it's mostly a matter of whether you're dependent on on-premise dining service or not. And the more you are dependent on that, the more your sales are being affected and are likely to be affected. Now, Technomic has about the same assumptions that we've all discussed, that we'll get the vaccine fully available by mid-year and probably rolled out by the end of the year. So their forecasts are based on that assumption, and that's why you see the strong bounce backs. Now, keep in mind this: if a market is off 50% and you go back 50%, you're only back to 75% of what you were when you started. Okay, I know that's kind of hard to grasp sometimes, but that's why even Technomic, if we go back one, you can see that Technomic expects the total market to bounce back 21% next year. But if you look at the cumulative average growth rates, it's still negative through 21. And that's because while we have the bounce back, it's not at the same scale as what we lost. As we all know in this market, those with drive-throughs have prospered, and that includes practically all the big QSRs, not all of them, but you know, it's pretty much across the board. So anybody with a very well-functioning drive-through in this market is probably not off at this juncture more than 5 or 10%. Many of them are actually matching or exceeding comps from last year. I talked about Sonic being up 40%. But, you know, McDonald's is basically back to full comp sales, at least in the U.S. It's not true overseas, but in the U.S. We all know how well the pizza folks are doing. Anybody with a lot of digital capability and a product that travels well, like pizza, like chicken wings. Wingstop is doing amazing numbers. And of course they have a lot of digital capability, is doing very well. So digital capability, drive-throughs, other kinds of off-premise, third-party delivery, all those are benefiting quick service. Fast casual doesn't have as many drive-throughs. They're all, you know, a lot of fast casuals developed during the Great Recession, and so they were taking advantage of cheap real estate in strip sites and the like. And if you think about Five Guys and Chipotle's, you know, Starbucks, a lot of those are in inline strip sites without drive-through capability. So they've been more affected. Mid-scale, which is full service without alcohol, has been more affected for a couple of reasons. They haven't done as good a job at pivoting to off-premise. Among the casual dining guys, you know, Applebee's and Chili's and some of those folks were already doing a very robust business in takeout. You know, you had Chili's to go and Applebee's, you know, they had their curb lanes and all that kind of stuff. A lot of those big chains are only off about 15 to 20%. Those at kind of the bottom of the casual dining scale. Mid-scale has not been able to pivot as well. I mean, folks like Bob Evans and Denny's has done a little better job. IHOP, some of those folks. Again, they didn't have drive-throughs, even though a lot of the stores were freestanding, and so they've been challenged from that off-premise side. The other thing is that mid-scale tends to be older adults. Okay, so if you think about the customer mix at those types of restaurants, they tend to be older, and therefore more of them are avoiding going out to eat. Casual dining, you know, you get casual dining brands like Buffalo Wild Wings and those sorts of folks who attract younger people, you know, in those markets where they've had some casual dining going on, you know, Texas and Florida and the Southwest. And and they also have products that travel well in many cases. And then fine dining, of course, has been the most affected because they are almost totally dependent on premise. Even supermarkets, as well as they've done from a total retail standpoint, and retail sales at supermarkets are up about 12% this year so far. Their food service operations have actually been off. And if you think about typical prepared food kind of setups in supermarkets, you had a lot of salad bars, you had a lot of grab and go kind of things that got shut down because of the pandemic. So while they're doing okay, they've still been off. Same thing with C-stores. Those C-stores are bouncing back pretty well. The other commercial segments that are non-restaurant within the market, recreation, lodging, have been very dramatically affected, and still are. Some of the other segments are doing a little better. All right, in the non-commercial segments, forgive me because I can't see the data on the far right side of the screen here, so I'm missing a few categories here. We talked about how Kirk talked about how people are not going to the office. That's had a dramatic impact on business in industry food service. Schools, while most of them have been operating, at least some, even if they're remote during the pandemic on the food service side, because they're feeding the free and reduced lunch kids as much as they can with curbside takeout, and some of them are running meals out in school buses, out into neighborhoods and the like. It's still a dramatic fall because of the loss of the on-premise. Same thing with college and university, and you can see the dramatic impact on their food service sales. Now, do notice that almost all those categories are expected to bounce back significantly next year. We'll see. I think if I talk to Joe Pollack at Technomic, I think he would probably tell you that they were a little optimistic about how fast things would turn around. Even hospital food service, primary care food service has been pretty negatively impacted for the simple reason that the on-premise kind of things, their public service areas, restaurants and staff catering are down. They've been focused pretty much on COVID, and so some of the normal food service sales that they would have gone away. One of the few bright spots has been senior living, and they've done a little better job at keeping COVID out than some of the other segments. Nursing homes have been a disaster, as most of us know, from an infection standpoint. Senior living is a little more like restaurants in a hospitality kind of setting, and a lot of those facilities locked down early, and not all of them have been immune. My friend Robert Dare out in Omaha had an outbreak at his 4 senior living operations. So it's not been completely safe, but they've done a little better. So from a standpoint of the equipment and supplies industry, I think you have to look closely at what segments are doing well, where you can help those that aren't. Can you help them pivot to off-premise? I did a presentation. My first outing since the pandemic began was Filippo Berti invited me to come speak to the presidents at Ollie Group. Sorry, Kirk. And I had a long conversation with John Knackley at Metro, and the folks that make shelving have pivoted to helping their customers with grab and go cubicles and things like that, and they're doing very well. So that's a way you can kind of tailor the equipment need to the operator need. We talked earlier about the need for separate makeup lines with prep tables and the like. One of the people that was on my operator panel at my forecast meeting was Dickie Overstreet, who's in charge of facilities and construction at Abuelos. And Abuelos, even though a lot of their stores were open during the pandemic in Texas and the like, had a real problem with a pivot to off-premise because their refrigeration was 5 walk-ins at the back of the store. They had no point of use refrigeration out in front. And one of the things he was doing during the lockdowns was scrambling as much as he could to get some sort of refrigeration capability out in the front of the units. So there's a lot of need out there if you look closely at what the specific segments and the specific operators may need. Okay, let's. I don't want to take up the entire day here, and I'm starting to run out of my time. Let's look. I mentioned yesterday that you can expect E&S prices to rise despite the softness of the market, simply because some of the industrial metals like raw steels are as much as 30-40% higher than they were at the depths of in March and April. You can see the lines there from Metal Miner. Let's talk about my forecasts of the individual product categories. Let's look quickly at the third quarter MOSSE barometer, which showed the total market off about 25%. But as you can see, there's quite a bit of difference between the individual product categories. The equipment categories were holding up better than all the other categories that MOSSE tracks. And MOSSE, by the way, also ties this to NAFM size and shape and then weights it. So, equipment sales, and it's all 7 of the equipment categories, account for about 75% of the market. And so when MOSSE does the barometer, they weight it by those weights. And so the overall number you see applies those weights. Durable supplies were off about 25%. And if you think about it, that kind of matches what's going on in the operator market as a whole. So we talked about QSR being off maybe 5 to 10%, but even the best casual dining guys are off 15 to 20. And as a group, most of the market on the full service side is off 20 to 30%. And so if you think about it, the durable supplies numbers tends to follow that. How many ladles get lost or go down the disposer or the like tends to be tied to the volume, overall food service volume. It's more consumable than the capital goods side of equipment. Tabletop has been dramatically affected. I mean, those people are just gutted. Steelite laid off a lot of its salespeople. The whole Oneida group that includes a whole bunch, Tomlinson and a whole bunch of other people. They've really been devastated because people are not eating off premise, but they're also not eating in casinos. They're not eating in cruise ships. They're not eating in hotels. A lot of tabletop goes into hotels and casinos and cruise ships and that sort of thing. And we saw what those categories were doing. The furniture number will probably get worse rather than better as we go through, because as we realistically talked about, one of the panelists talked about, there's not a lot of stuff in the pipeline for next year, particularly all these people are going to be, except QSR, is going to be resource starved, and so their spending on capital goods is going to lag. That's what it is. Okay, I want to show you that, and then you can, and there's the consultant and quotation activity trends. The differential, as you can see, is still quite negative, about 25%. So you've got about 70, say 50% saying things are worse and 25% saying they're better, and that's your differential there. And it's better than it was in the second quarter, but it's still quite negative. All right, let's look at not my forecast, which we talked about yesterday, but my individual forecast for the product categories. Okay, so we talked about when we looked at the MOSI barometer, and I don't have the supplies categories here. I can pull that number up for you. I've got tabletop off about 50% this year. Durable supplies about 30, as I recall. But if you look at the individual product categories, equipment product categories, cooking always holds up the best for the simple reason that they're absolutely critical. You can't serve food if you can't cook it. While there's a lot of redundancy in things like fryers and QSR, there's not necessarily a whole lot of redundancy in other situations. I mean, think about, I guess a lot of Subways and Starbucks now have 2 fast ovens just in case, or based on volume, but there's a lot of stores with 1. And this, if I look at this market for 40 years, equipment always holds up the best of any category. I mean, cooking equipment, primary cooking equipment, and that's true. That's true in this market too. Part of the reason for that is that, remember, the QSRs are running volumes close to normal, so you're getting the same level of burn of a Frymaster fryer or a Henny Penny fryer at McDonald's as you were a year ago. And that stuff has to be replaced, even though there is a lot of redundancy, with 5, 6, 7, 8 vats in a lot of those stores. Refrigeration and ice is critical. So there's a difference between ice and both point of use and reach-in refrigerators. You obviously have to have those if they go down, but they can be fairly easily repaired. I mean, even if there's a total compressor failure, a service agent can go in there and fix that. It's different if you burn a hole in a fry vat, or if the combi finally limes up once and for all. So, or the magnetron breaks in the fast oven. So point of use refrigeration, that stuff, and walk-ins, they can be fixed in this environment. Ice machines have to be replaced in most cases. We talked about storage and handling. I probably actually would revise this one higher based on my conversations with Mr. Knackley. Serving equipment has been affected. There's 2 major components of serving equipment we don't think about. I mean, obviously we have all the cafeteria lines and that sort of stuff, the serving lines, the scramble systems, and all of those non-commercial segments we talked about where nobody is right now, or not as many as there used to be. They're affected, but the key thing, there's 2 key categories within serving equipment that you may not think about. One is beverage dispensing. So all of the carbonated beverage dispensers, in Kirk's World, Multiplex and Servend and those guys, they've had to pivot to some sort of touchless, contactless system. And most of them have. I mean, you can go up to a Coke Freestyle now and use your phone app to do it. My friends at Lancer, full disclosure, who are a sponsor of my newsletter, have what they call the L guard, which surrounds, the beverage dispensing heads in plexiglass. But they were affected and there's still a lot of QSRs that have closed dining rooms or have just closed off their self-service dispensing. So that's one area that's been affected. Another area that's been affected that's in serving equipment is coffee. So all the coffee equipment is also in serving. Everything from, $15,000 super automatic espresso machines at McDonald's to the sort of bean and cup stuff you see at C stores. Most of the C stores have gone back to allowing self-service. It's just some do and some don't, and they seem to do and QSR seems to don't. Food prep, you just don't have as much going on there. You don't have salad bars. You don't have all that kind of stuff. Same thing with warewashing. I mean, if you've got less on-premise dining, you're not washing dishes as often. And we talked about furnishing and custom fab. Custom fab's in there too. So retrofits, big retrofits, big non-commercial jobs, casino jobs, all that stuff's been affected. So now you'll notice that I have all of those categories rebounding some next year, but you notice that where most of the operator side of the market, you see a bounce back that's about equal in percentage terms, though it doesn't get back to 100%. For most of the categories, you'll notice that my equipment forecasts are about half or less. There's going to be a lag here. A lot of equipment hasn't been used. While there has been some ongoing project work, a lot of it's been shut down. Going forward, anything that's tax supported, like schools or some colleges and universities, some public health care, there's going to be no money for those folks unless there's a special bond issue. So the next year or two is going to be a period of operators gradually getting back to volumes that will allow us to start selling equipment and supplies to them. So if you think about the operator market starting to rebound the second half of next year. Yep. My time is up.
Hey, so much great information. Yeah, your time is up. So I'm going to ask you to, I'm going to just say thank you so much for everything you shared. So much great information, a lot to take in. And to me, it sounds like 2020, as we all know, it's been all about the pivot, right? And I think you said yesterday that we'll start seeing the bounce back in 2024. So thanks so much for your time today,
well,
Robin.
we get back to 2019 levels in 2024. The bounce back will occur over the course of the next 3 years. So don't give up hope.
We don't give up, do we?
No.
All right.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Bye.
All right, thanks a lot, Robin. If you guys haven't subscribed to the Ashton Report, I highly recommend that you do. And if anybody has any questions for Robin, go ahead and send them on the Q&A panel, and we'll put those together and send an email to Robin, and he can respond via email. Next up, we have the basics of Steam with Joe Nicholson. Joe is the senior product manager with Cleveland and is the guru of Steam. Joe, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Tim. Bear with me here a second and I'll get my camera and everything working here correctly. All right, share screen. All right. All right, welcome everybody. I appreciate your time today. Let me get my camera going here as well. Here we go. Blank integrated webcam and phone array. Okay, everyone with me? I hope so. Hard act to follow, Robin Ashton. Great guy, I've known him for a lot of years, and I hope I do you well on the basics of STEAM here. I know a lot of you probably know a lot about this, but we're just going to take some time today to talk about how STEAM works and where the STEAmer have evolved to today and popular trends and everything else. So we will get busy here. Right. Know why I'm not being able to. Oh, there we go. Okay, there's the agenda that we have today that we're going to talk about. And, you know, part of this I'm going to talk about today is that there's so many different kinds of steamers and you know, what's the right steamer for the different market segments, the different customers that we all have out there, from, you know, newer style steamers to the old pressure steamers that people are currently purchasing. But when you talk about steam, and I live on Lake Erie in Cleveland, Ohio, and it kind of drives me nuts when I'm watching the news and the forecasters talk about, they show the lake and they say, look at the steam rising off the lake. And I want to call them up and tell them, well, that isn't steam, that's condensate, okay? When steam is a colorless, odorless gas, and it's dry. So, you know, what they're seeing is water vapor, condensate, and steam is that clear area between the kettle and the condensate. The vapor is the steam that's condensing back in the water once it's given up its energy. And, you know, I'm going to talk about energy when I talk about steam because it really isn't about temperature. It really is about the distribution of that energy. When you take a liquid and you change it into a gas, you have loaded that with tons and tons of energy in there. And that is the special thing about cooking with steam. So when you talk about energy, really you're talking about BTUs when we're talking whether it's home air conditioning or heating, or whether you're talking about kitchen equipment. And you guys probably all know that 1 BTU is the amount of energy it takes to raise 1 pound of water. So if you have like a 16-ounce bottle of water in your hand, that's about 1 pound to raise that 1 degree Fahrenheit at sea level. So a BTU is a British thermal unit, and that's what it takes to raise that 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. So when you consider that when you look at BTUs, if you take water at 32 degrees and you bring it up to boiling, that takes you 180 BTUs. So basically it comes down to 212 minus 32 equal 180, or I tell a lot of people when you're talking about this, I'll say at 72 degrees, so you got room temperature water, and you bring it up to boil, it takes 140 BTUs to get it to that boiling point. Now, what really takes place here is that it takes an additional 970 BTU. So once you take that water from 32 or 72 up to 212, that 1 pound of water, it takes additional 970 to change that into steam. That's all the energy that's imparted into that steam at that point, okay? So that's what's special about when you're talking about cooking with steam. A lot of times we used to sell combi ovens here at Cleveland before they broke off into their own Convotherm brand. But I would explain to people, you could have a combi oven or a convection oven with hot air in it at 425 degrees. I can have a steamer that has steam inside of it at 212 degrees. So it's basically half the temperature. But if you open that combi oven door and you rolled up your sleeve and stuck your arm in there and waved it around, you really aren't going to get burned unless you touch one of the metal racks or something, okay? But if you open up that steamer door and you stick your arm in there, what's going to happen? You're going to get burned instantly. That is the power of steam, okay? And that's what the latent heat, it's the amount of energy available to transfer from steam to another object. Steam always likes to hunt out whatever is colder than it is and instantly releases that energy into that product, whether it be something that a food product you're trying to cook, or whether it be your arm that gets in the way of that steam. So that's the latent heat is the amount of energy that you have to put in. And if you stored that latent heat into that steam, when you've taken that water from 212 and boiled it away, that's that additional 970 BTUs that have been stored in there. Now, when I do these steam classes, and whether it be down at our Tampa office for our reps or our dealers out there, or you guys, something I like to pass on, steam is an invisible gas. People don't realize as well that it is also a dry gas, okay? Steam isn't wet, it's the condensate that's wet. And people have seen me down when I do the training exercises where I steam a cake inside of one of our steamers. And they just can't believe that that's possible. They think it's going to be a soup, if you will, of the cake mixture and water. But no, it actually steams a cake and it comes out beautiful. Steam has 6 times the amount of energy of water when it starts to boil. That's the power of changing it from a liquid to a gas. And also steam expands 1,600 times in volume when going from a liquid to a gas. That's why, a lot of steamers will have an open drain on them. That's why they vent the outside. In a lot of cases, it can't be installed without a hood because you need somewhere for that steam to go, okay? And like I said earlier, steam is always attracted to something colder than itself. So it's going to be you or the product you put in there. In fact, the colder it is, the more attracted it is to release its energy into that product, especially when you're talking about frozen product, okay? Steam is a very fast way to cook because of it releasing that energy in there. It's also a very natural, healthy way of cooking. If you really go back into the history of steam and everything, I'm sure people used to boil stuff in water. It was over 5,000 years ago that they say the Chinese invented the bamboo basket and they started steaming stuff, and eventually we got around to making commercial steamers and different kinds, which we're going to delve into later on in this presentation. Another thing about steam, it can be used to cook directly or indirectly. In the steamers, it's direct. In our kettles, it's indirectly. So we're filling that jacket, steam jacket, that's typically 2/3 with steam in there, which is transferring that energy into the product within that jacket. And I'd love to get into kettles today and talk about those even more in depth, but that's a whole nother subject to get on to. But steam cooking kettles, what make them so great is the steam and how large the jacket is, because that 2/3 jacket, you have 3 times the area of a stock pot to be able to transfer that energy into that product. And being that it's at lower temperatures, you don't burn things in a kettle as you do in a stock pot as well. So those are some of the things that make steam so special. As I mentioned earlier, people boiled in water. 5,000 years ago, it was a bamboo basket. And then eventually we came up with the steamer. And we weren't the only ones. There's been a lot of people over the years that came up with the steamers. But I thought I'd at least cover some of the stuff that I do know about. And a lot of this goes way back before my time. But you guys remember Clarence Birdseye? He's the guy that really figured out the flash freezing of frozen products like vegetables. And the faster you freeze them, the smaller the crystalline structure, so it doesn't degrade the products. But he figured out how to put them into boxcar and started sending those across the United States. 1946, the National School Lunch Act was signed by President Truman. And in 1948 is when we introduced our first Steamcraft steamer, which there's a little picture of it down at the bottom. Now, the neat thing and what I wanted to bring to you and show you is that our first steamer back then was a non-pressure, so atmospheric steamer. It was connectionless and boilerless. So essentially you plugged that thing in, you poured water in the bottom, you had a rack in there, you put your products inside of that, and as it steamed, natural convection flow of that steam rose up through that and cooked that product. We still have one of those units in our office around here. We had those in gas and electric, countertop and floor models. But water connection was an option, and basically the unit vented right out of the top of the steamer. Here's an old ad that we had, and there's our salesman back in the day that would travel around and demonstrate our little Porto Steamcraft to operators out in the field. Here's a picture of one of our booths back in the day, and I don't know if you guys remember Galen Gillette, but I don't think that's him in that video or in that picture. So in 1968, we basically took that defroster. It was what we called a D-series steamer, stood for defroster, and we worked with Marriott and their commissary because they wanted to do the frozen entrees and vegetables that Clarence Birdseye was selling to them. And so he went out to their hot shop stores, and we mounted that to a boiler base with a boiler in there in order to supply that. So it wasn't necessarily, heated from the bottom with directly by gas or electric. We actually incorporated the first boiler base in that and then routed that steam up into those compartments. But something we learned about that, and that was that even though it increased the speed and the heat production, it also produced too much steam, and we had to take that to a different level and figure out how to tone that steam down or figure out a way to monitor the usage of the steam in the compartments. Now, that brings up the next subject with how is steam made. We talked about a little bit about boilerless, and we're talking about boilers. Now, when I do these classes and I talk about boilers, I point to people and say, what do you think of when you think of a boiler? And I get a lot of different responses. Some people might say, I think of a train locomotive. I say, yep, that's exactly right. Or they might say the Titanic with all the big boilers that they had in order to run the the engine, okay, and get propulsion from it. All large boilers, okay. Boilers are made out of very thick steel, okay. It's a soft, mild steel so that it doesn't crack. It'll actually expand and contract a little bit so it doesn't break. And you guys will see, I'm sure, a lot of these central facility boilers. They could be in hospitals and in prisons, could be at universities. A lot of places will use boilers to heat the different areas of that facility, okay? They can be used on a boiler like this. You can use that steam for direct steam to go into a steamer or a kettle, but if it's used in a steamer, it really needs to be untreated steam. It needs to be fit for human consumption or being potable, okay? When you talk about us, we have small boilers. They're remote, they're self-contained. They fit down underneath the body of the steamer, okay? And they can be done in gas, electric, or even steam coil, if you will, which we'll talk about here in a little bit as well. Like I said earlier, boilers, they are under pressure. We typically run ours around 10 PSI. When properly sized, one of our, let's say, units with a boiler on it can operate direct steam kettles. So when you're looking to do that, you need to properly size that boiler so that you have enough capacity in that boiler to not only supply enough steam to the compartments that you're cooking the product in, but then enough steam to go out and leave that, which we call a power takeoff, to be directed to a steam jacketed kettle to power that kettle as well. We typically talk about volumes of steam for kettles in pounds of steam per hour, okay? When you talk about boilers, they are ASME mandated pressure gauges and safety devices because of all of that energy that you're storing inside of that boiler. Remember, that's 10 PSI in that. There's a ton of energy that's inside of that boiler. They require a lot of times a qualified service tech for maintenance and descaling. And I will say this, I've seen it more often lately than years back. A lot of municipalities will require a on-staff boiler operator if you're going to have a boiler within on that property, okay? So we're seeing that more and more where the boilers like this, people are moving away from them if possible, and where the requirements get a little stricter going forward. They're just more to maintain than a generator or a boilerless unit. As I said earlier, you can have gas, or electric, or direct steam. So I'm sure you guys know at gas powered, we're going to have burners underneath that to heat the water. Electric, the electric elements are right in the water. That's heating that water up. Or direct steam, what that means is that when we talked about earlier, when you have a remote boiler, or it's self-contained, that's in that facility, they may treat that steam with chemicals so that it doesn't corrode or rust out the pipes that's delivering that. So if they put the chemicals in there, that's not potable steam. That's what we call dirty steam, and it's not fit for human consumption. So we actually make a boiler that you can take that dirty steam, and we have a coil that goes down into that boiler that you route that dirty steam through. That dirty steam is submerged in that water in that boiler, which is clean water, so it doesn't come in contact. One is inside of the heat exchanger, one's outside of it. And that heat exchanger with that dirty steam heats that water to the boiling point and then creates steam. So you're actually making clean steam from the dirty steam out of a water treated boiler like that. So when you talk about, the units that are available out in the market nowadays, you have, the boilerless, you have generators, you have boilers, you have, there can be gas, electric, direct steam, or steam coils, okay? When you talk about units with the boilers in them, they're typically super fast, they're high production. You can do batch or a la carte out of a boiler type steamer that's out there, okay? These are just some of the common models that are out there. When you talk about the ones that have boilers on it, you can see it has doors underneath. That's where the boiler is located, underneath those units. And when you're talking about boiler models, you could use those for convection steamers, which are non-pressure or atmospheric steamers, or you can use that boilers have to be attached to a pressure steamer if you're going to use a compartment that has pressure inside of it, okay? So convection, atmospheric steamers, or pressure steamers can have boilers attached to those. Another common way that steam is made in the industry is atmospheric generators. Now, here's a picture of one here that that we use. And what's different about the atmospheric generator and a boiler is that I mentioned the boiler is made out of thick steel, where the atmospheric generators are typically made out of thinner stainless steel. The reason for that is that they don't have pressure inside of them. That's why it's not a boiler, it's an atmospheric generator. There's zero pressure inside of a generator. For that reason, they don't have safety pop-offs typically. They don't have to follow ASME regulations for the safety and sight glasses and things like that. Another nice thing about generators, they're less expensive to replace. You can get those in gas and electric. And being it's not a boiler, typically generators in the market are more operator friendly. They're easy for descaling. So somebody that's within the kitchen, it doesn't require a skilled operator to necessarily go and have to open up that boiler and to do that descaling. It can be done right from the cavity of the unit or a port that is located on the outside of the unit. You can use a chemical base to, it's a mild acid to go in there, and it will eat that scale up and remove that. So typically atmospheric generators are a lot more operator friendly for descaling than boilers are. But because they don't have any pressure inside of that generator, you cannot operate direct steam kettles off of it. Remember, you're going to have pressure in there to push that steam from that boiler over to that steam kettle. If you have an atmospheric generator, you don't have the pressure to do that, okay? So when you look at some common models that utilize generators, these are some of the ones that we have. You have the Steamcraft, which is a electric unit. You can get that in a 5-pan gas. Of course, you have the floor model units, and the Gemini is a generator style unit. But how that differs from the one in the middle is that it has 2 generators in it, one for each compartment. Okay. Now, when you talk about without a boiler or a steam generator, and that's what our very first steamer used to be, was that unit that I showed you earlier. That was called a boilerless steamer, right? So what that really means is steam is made directly inside the cavity of the steamer. The heating elements can be in the water or not in the water. It depends on the manufacturer of that steamer, but basically the water is heated And when that water reaches the boiling point, it turns into steam, and that steam is captured inside of that compartment, and that's how it cooks the products that are in there. It's typical for these to be offered in either gas or electric, or in some cases, flash steam is utilized. If you think about that, that's more like what they've used in combi ovens, where they have a heating element that's around the fan, or they have a heat exchanger that's around the fan. Water is directed or sprayed onto that, and that steam is created instantly when it hits the elements or the heat exchanger that's in there. So that's another way that steam is made when you're talking about boilerless units. Some people like to call these spritzer units is another name, or boilerless. And when you talk about these type units, in a lot of cases, they can be a connectionless unit, like our very first one was, or one with connections, meaning it has a water and drain. So typically with connections, it's going to autofill and auto drain when you turn them off. And when connectionless, that means that the operator is going to have to pour water inside the compartment. And at the end of the day, they're going to manually drain that water into a pan and dump it down the drain on a connectionless unit. You talk about boilerless models. These are a couple of offerings that we have. So that steam is made inside of the compartment with heating elements or gas combustion systems underneath. And they both have vents on those. Now, when you're talking about, different kinds of steamers, and we've already discussed boilerless, generators, and boiler units, okay? But then there's two different ways of cooking with steam, okay? One is a convection or atmospheric, which means there's no pressure inside of that compartment. So the steam inside of that compartment is always going to be at about 212 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? The nice thing about convection steamers, whether it's natural convection or whether it's fan convected steam, is that you can open and close the door pretty much at any time, okay? When you're talking about atmospheric steamers too, being that you're cooking at 212 and you're putting delicate products in there, you guys have probably seen, if you ever cook broccoli and you get it above 212 degrees or almost any green leafy type vegetables like that have chlorophyll in it, the higher the temperature you get above 212, it will actually turn that a yellow color, okay? So that's why you don't ever want to use a pressure steamer to cook, some of those more delicate products like that, okay? So as a result, if you cook, fresh and frozen vegetables in their seafood, poultry, pasta, they typically, let them sit in there too long, come out perfectly cooked. You can get them al dente or however much done that you want, all right? Like I mentioned earlier, when you're using a convection steamer, it's more gentle than a pressure steamer. A pressure steamer is going to have pressure inside of that compartment. It's almost like a pressure cooker that you might have at home to do canning and things. When you cook vegetables in a convection steamer, you're going to get brighter, more vivid colors. You're going to get flavors that are more enhanced, better than if you used a microwave, because that can degrade the food quality as well. So it's going to taste better. It locks in the flavors. Also, what people don't realize as well is that when you're cooking with steam and you're leaving that door closed, eventually the steam purges all the air out of that compartment. So it becomes a low oxygen environment. And when you have a low oxygen environment, you're going to get a better product. You're not going to have the oxidation that takes place when you have oxygen inside a compartment. So you're not going to get a transfer of odors and flavors unless you have cross-contamination from dripping from one pan to another if you're using perf pans. So obviously, if you were doing something like that and you were cooking multiple items in there, you would want to put, if you're doing shrimp or something, on the bottom so that it weren't dripping that product onto the other vegetables in there. But at our classes, we have actually cooked multiple products all in the same compartment and show how you can get a independent taste out of that because of a low oxygen environment than you can with in other methods of cooking. Okay, nutrition is another factor why people like to use steamers. You know, when you cook it at 212 or 100 degrees, you get the nutrition, you retain the vitamins and minerals. Years ago, I read a report about microwaving and how that can, negatively affect not only the texture of the product that's being cooked in there, but also nutrition and the vitamins and minerals that are in that. So steaming is much more nutritious, it's more natural. And how fast it is. Once again, 212 degrees, it's a lower temperature, but we're not talking about temperature, we're talking about energy and steam. The convection steam swirls around the food. It has 6 times the energy of the water when it starts to boil. So essentially it is a lot faster and it's a lot more efficient at cooking. Okay, here's the demonstration that when you're talking about variety and volume, we've done this before for some of you people who've been through our other classes out there. It's typical for most steamers to fit into a 24-inch wide space. So they can fit in a lot of areas. They don't take up a lot of area. When you can open the door at any time when you have an atmospheric unit with a generator or a boiler, so you can check the progress, you can season, you can stir the product inside of that. Okay, and the nice thing too is you can go right from frozen to cook. You don't really necessarily have to thaw those products before you put them in the steamer. So it makes it a lot easier than some other methods of cooking that's out there, because that steam can gently thaw that product and then start to cook it after it's thawed. Okay, the other unit, which I have pictured here, is a pressure steamer. And as I mentioned earlier, you have 5 PSI of steam pressure inside of that compartment. So when you close that door and latch it, you're turning that handle on there to lock that door tightly closed. You open that handle and steam goes inside of that compartment. So when you put steam under pressure, and as I mentioned earlier, steam at atmosphere conditions is going to be 212 degrees. But as you put steam under pressure, it raises the temperature. So at 5 PSI, you're going to get about 227 degrees temperature inside of that cooking compartment. All right. Now, it's pretty typical for inside of those cooking compartments on pressure steamers that they don't have fans inside of it. We rely on that steam to try and penetrate that product and get into that and cook it. So the unfortunate, the higher temperatures negatively affect food, particularly you're talking about the vegetables, the broccoli, cauliflower, things like that. We don't utilize a cold water condenser like we do in our atmospheric steamers and a pressurized steamer. And it's static steam. It isn't stripping that moisture barrier off the food when you're cooking with static steam, as you can see in the little picture that we have there. But some of the benefits of these pressure steamers is the higher temps, which work better for root type vegetables. Or you can, so you're talking about turnips or beets or potatoes, or rice is a good thing to use in there. You could do eggs, meats, solid meats, muscle meats are very good inside of a pressure steamer. So they're high volume, high production. They're heavy duty institutional installs. I tell you what, we don't sell a ton of these pressure steamers every year, but we still have plenty of people that have utilized pressure steaming in their operation for 50, 70 years. And even though there are alternative ways to cook, they just don't want to change. They want that pressure steamer. And we're one of 2 manufacturers that still have it out there. So I don't think that you guys are speccing any pressure steamers, but we just want to let you know what the difference is, and that there are still manufacturers out there that manufacture those. Okay. So just a little recap, the difference between a convection steamer and a pressure steamer is that convection is pressureless steam. It has an open drain when you're cooking. We utilize a cold water condenser in there so that we don't get the flavor transfer, and that also makes it a low oxygen environment. We've got a separate generator. They are high volume. We got high velocity steam that's swirling in there. So it's a convection steamer. It's stripping away that moisture barrier, and you're only cooking at 212. Whereas a pressure steamer, you've got 5 PSI in there. You're going to have about 227 degrees. The drain is closed. It has to be in order to get the 5 PSI inside of that compartment. We have a separate boiler for that unit. And unfortunately, it's static steam. So you don't have the ability to strip away that condensate layer off the product like a convection steamer does. But you do have the higher temperatures, and you have the pressure that's trying to cook that product that is inside of that steamer. Okay. So to kind of, put it all together and kind of look at things from our point of view here at Cleveland, we offer, all of those different types of steamers, as do a lot of other manufacturers that's out there. So we have boilerless units, we have generator units, and we have the boiler base units. And here's kind of a picture of the whole family of steamers that we have out there. So when you talk about steamers, what is the best steamer for our customers that are out there? Okay. And this is sometimes a tough decision for a lot of the people that I get in front of, because they don't understand either the way that the customer's cooking, or that segment on what they need. May it be something that is more user-friendly, or they can perform the descaling themselves on it, whatever that case, or they want to drive a kettle off of it. Okay, so there's a lot of different choices of steamers that are out there. So the boilerless, these are great, but a lot of times they're probably the slowest of the units that are out there for cooking. Okay, generator is going to be pretty fast, where it's not a boiler, but you can open and close the door anytime with a generator steamer that's easy to descale and clean. And then you have your boiler-based steamers, which they're certified for 15 PSI. We run around 10. They're very powerful. You can operate other kettles, but a lot of cases you need more qualified people to descale or clean that. Here's a slide that I put together for a lot of our reps and a lot of our dealers out there to try and help them select the proper steamer for their customer. So I call it the steamer family tree, if you will. And what I typically say to those guys, hey, if you're looking to do some steaming, or you got a customer comes to you, what's the first question you ask them? You know, and I get gas, electric, I get what volume of food you're cooking, you know, all kinds of stuff, which are great questions. The number one question I like to have them ask is, how are you steaming? So I get people looking at me like, well, what do you mean, Joe? And I say, well, how are you steaming? Are you primarily doing batch cooking, or are you doing a la carte or a mixture of those two? And they go, I don't know. I have to find out. So we get a lot of schools, K through 12. We get a lot of restaurants like buffets that are doing prep cooking. You know, a lot of those people are hospitals. They're doing batch cooking. They're loading that compartment up with product. They're closing the door. They're setting the timer. When it's done, they pull it out. It goes to the line and they load it up again. So that is batch cooking. The boilerless units are very competent at doing batch cooking. Okay, because the issue when you talk about boilerless units being that they generate the steam inside of that compartment. Every time you open the door, what happens? That steam comes out, goes up the hood, you close the door, it's going to take a little while to fill that compartment back up with steam again. So really, if people are doing batch cooking, boilerless is a great solution for them. If they're doing a la carte and batch, okay, throughout the day and whatnot, you can't really sell a boilerless steamer to somebody that's going to be doing individual portions of vegetables or lobster tails or crab legs in there, because in that batch unit, boilerless, if you're opening that door, you're losing that steam, it's going to hurt the efficiency of that unit. So in those cases, they really need to get a unit with a generator or a boiler. So I have the generator units in the middle and the boiler units over to the far right side. So in this slide here, not only do I give them, you know, whether they're convection or whether they're connectionless and the pan capacity and the fuels that they use, I also have Energy Star in there as well. So this is a good slide to help people understand what units are appropriate for what applications that are out there, okay? Now, when you talk about popular trends in steam cooking, just like fat ties and skinny ties, you know, we moved away from that boilerless technology and actually coined the Cleveland convection steamer. So you've got convected steam in there with a cold water condenser and all these things going on here. You know, boilerless steamers kind of have made a recovery again, okay, in recent years. And we're okay with that. So we kind of, you know, dusted off that and brought the boilerless unit back. And, you know, some of the reasons why people like the boilerless steam, they're doing batch. They don't really need a generator or a boiler. So the maintenance is less. The cost of the unit is typically less than those. If they do the proper daily maintenance, which is, you know, at the bottom of the unit, you got to drain that water out of there. There's going to be probably some scale that's in there. So you take a little vinegar on a rag, which is a mild acid, you can wipe that out and you can descale that. So your daily cleaning is the descaling. That's one of the nice things about these units. They don't have a generator boiler, so you don't have to descale those. It's a lot easier to meet Energy Star efficiencies. I know that a lot of my competitors in our units that are boilerless meet Energy Star requirements. Unfortunately, they're typically not as fast as a generator or a boiler, and they're best suited for batch cooking. Now, what I'd like to do here now is to swap over and kind of talk about some of the things that we have done as Cleveland to bring this type of cooking more to the levels of what people expect nowadays. So let me swap this over to to the other camera here and the other microphone. And go. By the way, I got John Lanning here with me. He's going to operate the camera. I know a lot of you guys probably know John. And so I've got this on there now. Correct, John? You can see. So anyway, this is a boilerless steamer, both of these units. Okay. As I said earlier, you can get them in connected and connectionless. The connected unit, connectionless. So some of the things that we've done to really steamers is we've come up with one thing, and that is that we have convection steamers now in these boilerless. If you look in the back, we have a fan with baffles in here. So that's taking that steam energy, pulling it through and distributing it throughout this cavity. So you get a lot better distribution of that energy from top to bottom, left to right, front to back. Okay. The other problem with the typical boilerless steamers in there is that when you're cooking your vegetables and your proteins in here, that the byproducts from that steaming process end up going down into the water pan that's in the bottom. Now, I know all you guys have cooked spaghetti on a stove. What happens when it boils? It foams up. And I have a picture of one of our competitors' units that has a foam line that's halfway up the door, okay? That's a problem because you're gonna get the transference of, because all those bubbles in that foam are gonna give you a flavor transfer. They're gonna give you cross-contamination. Let's say that you've cooked peas, carrots, corn, and broccoli and shrimp in here, and now you're gonna do white rice. If you get that foaming taking place, your white rice is gonna taste like everything else you cooked in the steamer. What we've done, and this is different than everybody else, is we put in this clean shield, okay? I've taken out the racks for convenience, you can see, but any of the byproducts that come out of those perf pans or the pans land onto this clean shield, and this thing is dipped so that it funnels down to a drain. Now, this is a not connected unit. This is a connectionless unit. So it takes all of those starches, all of those proteins, removes them from the cavity and puts them inside of this hotel pan that's underneath that you can drain to at the end of the day. When you remove all of that stuff, you do not get the foaming, you do not get the cross-contamination as you get in the other guys' units out there. It may not seem like a big deal all the time, but consider if you have people that are vegans or vegetarians and they want the right rice. Let's say if somebody may have a allergen to shellfish, you could get somebody sick from the cross-contamination of that foaming that happens in a lot of these connectionless or boilerless steamers. Now, in this unit, this is connectionless. You see, you fill it with the water here. You're going to pour the water in there. At the end of the day, you can open this valve and drain that water into this pan. But let's just say that you've got a customer, or we've got a customer that is retherming bagged product inside of the steamer. In that case, we have this plate that fits into the side racks. This plate bypasses the clean shield and recycles the condensate that's coming back out of there to go down into that pan. So it gives you longer periods of steaming without having to add additional water into it. We have this, it's a standard that comes with the unit, so it's convertible. You can remove all of that byproduct out of there if you're cooking in perf pans and you're gonna get the byproducts, or if you're doing bagged product, you can put in this tray, which recycles that water again. It's gonna give you about an hour longer before you have to refill. On our connected unit here, this is our clean shield that's in the bottom. It's essentially the same as the not connectionless unit, but this drain doesn't go to a pan. It actually takes it outside and puts it down the drain that this unit is plumbed to. But there's also a very nice other feature about this that I want to show you guys, and that is that when you pull this out, and I'll show you what this looks like, and you can see the drain in the bottom, that attaches to a standpipe that's in the back, okay? That standpipe also acts as a safety device. If you look over here in this corner, you can see our probes. So when you turn the unit on, it automatically fills with water and then shuts off. As the water is consumed, it turns the water back on and refills again, okay? But I have seen, units out there in the field where the fill valve goes bad or something shorts out the probes. And when this unit is closed, remember it's a batch cooker and it might be set for 30 minutes. That water level's down here, but the valve goes bad and it's continuing to add water and add water. I've seen it in other people's units. They open the door, they've got a cavity that's half filled with water and that comes out. It's dangerous. That's never going to happen with ours because of that overflow standpipe. So in conjunction with the clean shield and the standpipe, not only do you remove all those byproducts from that steaming process, but you also have a safety device built in where it's going to keep people safe, okay? One of the other things that I wanted to cover while we're here right now, and that's our door. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the sound our door makes. This is the only door that could withstand the abuses of Red Lobster back in the day. And it's a two-piece door, okay? And as I tell a lot of people, if they can remember 3, 2, 1, the nice thing about this door has a 3-year warranty. John, if you can get a shot of these hinges that are on here and the pins, they're heavy duty pins and hinges. The pins and hinges are probably bigger than what's holding most car doors on their cars nowadays, okay? So that's why we have a 3-year warranty on this door. And if you notice, it's a two-piece door. So what's nice about that is that this allows this inner door to adjust itself to the front of the unit. Every time it adjusts itself so you get a good seal and you don't get steam leakage. The other guys that have a fixed door, it's cheaper for them to do that. This is more expensive to go this route, but it's safer. But it does a couple of things. It auto adjusts. It also allows cooling air to flow through to keep this cooler to the touch. And if the hinges on the other guy's units with a solid door, where the latch ever gets out of adjustment, it can't adjust itself. You're going to get steam leaks. It's not going to happen with this, okay? So the 3 is a 3-year warranty. 2, it's a two-piece door. And let me show you something. This inner door comes off. And just like if you rotate your mattress at home or your tires on your car, you can take that off and put it back on. And now you have just doubled the life of your gasket because it doesn't get a memory. But something to take even further than that is that if you take this door off of here and you take these 4 bolts and undo them, this gasket can be flipped over. So anybody with a 7/16" wrench can take this gasket off of here and flip it over and utilize that to rotate that gasket to get you 4 times the gasket life as compared to our competitors that are out there, okay? So that's the nice thing about the door. And then that's the two-piece door. The 1 is that we give people a 1-year warranty on that gasket, okay? So a lot of the other guys out there, it's a consumable part. We give you additional year on that warranty of the gasket. So last but not least, just while we're here, I got a couple of minutes before we go to questions. We have the SureCook feature. It's a load compensating timer. What's nice about that is you know how long it takes to cook 1 tray of peas in there. You can put 3 pans in there and set it for the same time. It's going to compensate for the load that's inside of there. So people don't have to have a list on the front of the steamer door telling you how long for each pan or multiple pans or whatever. How that works is that we've got thermostats that are inside of the compartment. So when you open that door and put that product in there, it's going to wait until it reaches a certain temperature and then count down. So thus, it's going to compensate for the load. Additionally, so you're doing macaroni and cheese. You want to open it up and stir the macaroni and cheese, put it back in. It's going to stop that timer until it fills back up with steam, compensating for opening the door. So it's doing a lot of different things for you when you're talking about that Sure Cook feature. It makes it a lot easier. So on that note, I am going to see if any of you guys have any questions for me. Let me see if I can flip this back over to the onboard camera here.
Hey, Joe, great presentation. Thanks for sharing all the information on the basics of steam. I do have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
What is the difference between a steam generator and a boiler?
Okay, well, a boiler is going to have steam pressure in it. It could be, one of ours up to 15 PSI, or an in-house boiler might have up to 100 PSI. So a boiler is going to have pressure inside of it, and a steam generator is atmospheric or zero pressure.
Okay, great. So then why are boilerless steamers good for only batch cooking?
The reason that they're best at batch cooking is because they generate the steam inside of the compartment. So that's not a type of unit that you want to keep opening every couple of minutes and putting different products in there. Because every time you do that, you open the door, you're allowing that steam to come out and go up the hood. And when you close the door, it's going to take a minute or two in order to get back up to full steaming again. So that's why boilerless units are better for batch cooking. You really shouldn't use those for a la carte or doing individual type portions.
So if I was doing like dim sum, what steamer would I want?
Well, if you're doing individual, then you're going to want a generator or a boiler type steamer.
Okay.
And one thing I want to say about that as well, generators and boilers, they pretty much do the same thing. The only reason somebody may want a boiler steamer is if they want to run a steam jacketed kettle, a direct steam jacketed kettle next to it. Otherwise, generator and boilers are very similar. I would have to say that the boiler units are kind of declining in their popularity over years as people are going to self-contained kettles, being a gas or electric, and because of the maintenance of boilers. But I still have a lot of customers that still want to operate that direct steam kettle they have sitting next to that steamer.
Okay. Well, great. Well, I'm still one of those that's amazed that you can steam a cake. So, but it makes sense when you explain it.
It's one of my favorite things to do. People really kind of finally understand that steam is a clear, dry gas when I steam a cake.
Clear, dry. Okay,
That's
great.
right.
Awesome. Well, Joe, thanks so much for your time today. We appreciate it. And we're going to go ahead and go back over to Tim McDougald.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Have a great day.
All right, thanks again, Joe, for your presentation, and thanks again to Robin for his time today as well. That brings session 1 to a close. Next up, we have session 2 starting at 8:45 a.m. featuring Betsy Craig discussing an allergen-friendly back of house, and Tom Cowley will talk conveyors and accumulators. We'll see you at session 2.